The year is 312 AD. Rome is about to enter its first ever war with an enemy it can't even see or touch. Its forces are deployed along the Italian peninsula, where they engage in battle against a foe that has been dead for centuries. You heard that right. The Roman Empire is at war with ghosts. The generals leading these ghostly legions are Christian monks, who have risen from their graves to wage war in the name of their resurrected Lord. And leading them is none other than the recently deceased Emperor Constantine the Great, Rome's first Christian emperor. So, how did this happen? How did Constantine come back from the dead? And why is he waging a pointless war against himself? Stay tuned to find out. As I've already said, the year is 312 AD, and the Roman Empire is going to war. But not just any war, mind you. This is the Battle of Milvian Bridge, a confrontation between two Roman armies, each claiming to be loyal to the true Rome, each believing itself to be the rightful heir to Romulus and Remus. On one side we have the seasoned General Maxentius, a capable ruler who has successfully defended the empire against barbarian raids and maintained peace throughout Italy. On the other, we have Constantine, a young emperor with no military experience, whose claim to the imperial throne is shaky at best. Despite the odds being stacked against him, Constantine decides to invade Italy, leading his army across northern Greece and into the Balkans. Here he defeats and kills many of his enemies, including the aforementioned generals Maxentius. After suffering heavy casualties, Constantine decides to make camp and prepare for a long siege of Rome. It was here, while making camp, that something strange began to happen. His men started coming back to life. Okay, I'm being a little dramatic. What really happened was that several Christian soldiers who had died in battle started showing up at his camp alive and well, claiming to have visions of the recently deceased speaking to them and guiding them back to the land of the living. Now, you could write this off as a bizarre coincidence, but those who witnessed these events saw them as a sign of divine favor. Especially because these so-called reanimated soldiers started winning battles for Rome. The most notable of these victories was, of course, the Battle of Milvian Bridge. The ghost army led by Constantine and the shades of his fallen enemies met on the banks of the Tiber River, with the latter being decisively defeated. So was this a miracle? Was this some sort of divine intervention in human affairs? Well, perhaps, but there's also another explanation for what happened at Milvian Bridge, an explanation that doesn't involve miracles or God. You see, although Constantine would later become known as the man who spread Christianity throughout the Roman Empire, this wasn't always the case. In fact, when he first took power, his views on the subject were a lot more ambiguous. When he came to power in 306, he tried to stay on good terms with everyone, issuing coins bearing both the traditional pagan symbol of the Roma and the Christian cross. See, he even built churches in several cities, only to have them converted into pagan temples soon after. So given this rather wishy-washy attitude towards Christianity, it makes sense that when he entered Rome, he didn't want to come off too aggressively religious, lest he alienate the many non-Christian subjects he ruled over. Thus, although he did defeat Maxentius and his pagan army, he didn't go around claiming that he'd done so with the help of Jesus Christ or that his army was made up of the undead. He simply said that his army was victorious, because the gods were on their side. A subtle distinction that nevertheless left a lot of wiggle room for his more religiously inclined subjects to interpret things however they wanted to. In fact, this was a recurring tactic employed by Constantine throughout his reign. He often gave vague references to the gods, leaving it up to his audience to decide exactly which gods he was talking about. He even went as far as to allow Christianity to exist openly within the Roman Empire. A far cry from his predecessors who viewed the religion with suspicion and actively worked to suppress it. But despite this relative tolerance, Constantine still feared offending the sensibilities of his predominantly pagan subjects. That is why he avoided doing anything too radical, like, say, replacing the old gods with a new one. And that, SYS. Not surprising that when he was faced with the choice of converting to Christianity or keeping the status quo, he chose the latter. This all changed in 314, when the aforementioned Licinius came to power. Initially, the two emperors shared a relatively good relationship, splitting the empire between them and ruling fairly amicably. But as time passed, the The two became rivals, clashing over territory and influence. By 324, the situation had gotten so bad that war seemed inevitable. And during the conflict, Constantine decided to make a bold move. He issued the Edict of Milan, a proclamation that would change Christianity forever. With this edict, Constantine legalized Christianity throughout the Roman Empire, granting Christians freedom of worship and returning property confiscated from them under the rule of previous emperors. With this single action, Constantine established Christianity as a legitimate religion within the Roman Empire and set the stage for its eventual spread throughout Europe. But it wasn't all sunshine and roses, not by a long shot. For starters, while the edict did technically legalize Christianity, it also gave pagans the right to persecute Christians if they wished. So, despite Constantine's good intentions, things didn't immediately improve for the followers of Jesus. And to make matters worse, his son Constantius II didn't share his father's enthusiasm for the new religion. After taking power, he began persecuting Christians, going as far as to murder bishops and abbots, outlawing Christian books and closing down schools and churches. So, although Constantine did lay the groundwork for Christianity's eventual rise to prominence, it was by no means a smooth road. Okay, so now that we've established that Constantine was a bit of a ditherer when it came to religion, let's get back to the story of his ghost army. As I mentioned earlier, Constantine fought and killed many enemies during his campaign in Italy. One of these enemies was a man named Maxentius, the de facto ruler of Rome, who opposed Constantine's claim to the imperial throne. Now, before the battle with Constantine, Maxentius had enjoyed a fair amount of success in his military career. He had successfully defended Rome against barbarian raids and had even managed to hold off the usurper Licinius for several years. However, despite his military prowess, Maxentius ultimately met his demise at the hands of Constantine's army. The two armies clashed at the Milvian Bridge in 312 AD, and Maxentius's forces were routed. He himself was killed, either by a spear or by drowning, as he tried to escape. Either way, his head was cut off and displayed on the tip of a spear as a warning to any potential usurpers. Now, according to legend, this is where things get a little weird. You see, after Maxentius's death, Constantine became the sole ruler of the western half of the empire. However, not everyone accepted his rule, and some still proclaimed Maxentius as the true emperor. To deal with these so-called partisans, Constantine employed a variety of tactics, from offering them amnesty to outright executing them. But one of the most effective tactics he used was to play on their fears of the supernatural. As I mentioned earlier, many people believed that the reason Constantine had won the Battle of Milvian Bridge was because he had the support of the Christian God. To capitalize on this fear, Constantine had the body of Maxentius exhumed and paraded through the streets of Rome, supposedly accompanied by ghastly apparitions and ghostly legions. Now, whether or not these apparitions actually appeared is debatable, but the rumor of them did serve Constantine's purpose. It struck fear into the hearts of Maxentius's supporters and discouraged anyone else from considering a rebellion. So, in a way, Constantine used the legend of the ghost army to further his own political agenda. He played into the superstitions of the time and created a narrative that helped him consolidate power. Of course, there is the possibility that the ghost army was real, but that's a topic for another video. In the end, though, Constantine's use of the ghost army, whether real or imagined, was a clever move. It helped him to establish his authority and put down any potential rebellions. And it's yet another example of how the Roman Empire was affected by the rise of Christianity. Well, folks, that's all we have time for today. Thank you for watching, and I hope you learned something new.